something I did regularly was I would challenge people on the gospel. Friends would say to me, Nabeel, do you know Jesus? And of course, Muslims have a very developed view of Jesus. They believe he's the Messiah. They believe that he's a miracle-working man. He's sinless. Muslims believe Jesus is going to come back at the end of times. And so I would have a script ready to give, and I would challenge people on their view of Jesus.
And by the way, how did Christians generally do when you did challenge them on their faith?
Miserably.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. I'm joined today with a very special guest, Josiah Graves, who is also my pastor.
Hey, buddy.
Well, this video is interesting. It's Nabeel Qureshi, who you may be familiar with. He gives 3 things that are like stumbling blocks to the Islamic perspective about Jesus. 3 things that Muslims do not believe about Jesus, but that the record of history affirms. So let's dive in.
Growing up, I learned how to pray the 5 daily prayers, prayed them regularly. By the age of 5, I had memorized the last 7 chapters of the Quran and recited those regularly in my 5 daily prayers. And I actually finished the entire Quran recitation in Arabic by the age of 5. So it was a very devout Muslim life, but my parents also came with some presuppositions about the West. They see the immorality, they see the way people commit adultery, and they see things on TV and the immodest dress, and they impute all of that to Christianity because they see the West as a Christian area. So not only was it me practicing Islam, but they had also kind of taught me to defend myself against Christianity. And that's a common thing for Muslims around the world to come to the West with. And so growing up then, I was a devout Muslim, yes, but I was also trained with arguments to challenge and respond to the gospel.
In the same way that that's true of an outsider looking in and saying America equals Christian, I think within America, people look and they go, you know, this scandal is a reflection of Jesus. This weird church pastor coming in on a roller coaster and doing a backflip, and so, you know, you see all these weird things, and I think that people go, well, that's the church, I guess. So I guess that's Christianity. So I guess I don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah. We bring our biases from the culture to the religion. And I say we might do the same. We have to be aware of, like, maybe there's a cultural thing happening in a certain country and we equate it to that religion, rather than saying, what does the doctrine teach? What is the doctrine of Christianity? What is the doctrine of Islam? Rather than maybe judging it by the cultural issues, judging it by what does it actually say. And
so that was something that made us even more proud. As Muslims, we thought, we are following the true God. He affects and permeates every aspect of our lives. Whereas in the West, people realize their faith is false, and that's why it doesn't really affect the way they live. That's kind of how we subconsciously thought.
So then for your whole childhood, this is how you were brought up, this is your thinking, these were your convictions. Again, this was your identity, which really stuck with me as well. But there was one particular friendship that you developed, and maybe you can tell us what age that was and how that over time started to introduce you to Christianity.
Absolutely. It was something I did regularly was I would challenge people on the gospel. Friends would say to me, Nabeel, do you know Jesus? And of course, Muslims have a very developed view of Jesus. They believe he's the Messiah. They believe that he's a miracle-working man. He's sinless. Muslims believe Jesus is going to come back at the end of times. And so I would have a script ready to give, and I would challenge people on their view of Jesus.
And by the way, how did Christians generally do when you did challenge them on their faith?
Miserably. What I realized very early on was that even the slightest challenge on the Bible, on the reliability or the compilation of the Bible, or on Jesus' deity, or on the Trinity especially, no one really knew more than just enough to say what they were told to say. They didn't really know why they believed what they believed, didn't know how to defend it. And so as part of me honoring Islam, I would challenge Christians. Because you see, Muslims see the Trinity as polytheism, and that's offensive to Muslims. And so in so challenging one specific Christian, for the first time, and this is when I was a freshman in college, for the first time someone was able to actually respond to my challenge. And I realized this guy not only knows some information about his faith, but he actually cares about his faith. And so we developed this friendship that resulted from me challenging him on the Bible. And that's how I began to get introduced to the power and truth of the gospel.
His name was David, is that right? And I love about in your book how you talk about David was loving to you, patient with you, became a friend to you, which meant so much to you. It wasn't just this all just about this one conversation. There was more of the heart of Christ behind that. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I really do think that, well, I believe what Jesus says. Jesus says that unless you're willing to pick up your cross and follow me, you are not worthy of me. So the gospel is not just, hey, do you want to be saved? Hey, do you want to live a better life? It's, are you ready to die for the sake of this message? And that's something that requires someone to lay down their life. Now, if I'm telling someone, hey, lay down your life, but they don't know they can trust me, why would they ever listen to me? You need to have a relationship with someone when you're sharing the gospel with them, if they're going to hear it. Now, of course, I'm not saying that street preaching doesn't work. I've preached on the side of the street too, and that does work at times. But by far and away, the most powerful way to share the gospel is through relationships.
Right. So through this friendship and relationship with this man, David.
That's David Wood, by the way.
Okay.
Who, do you know him at all?
No, I'm not familiar.
I've had him on this channel before, and it's funny that Nabeel is highlighting the relationship that they had and the love that David presented and everything, because he kind of doesn't necessarily have that reputation. Not that he's caustic or mean, but he's very extremely knowledgeable about both Islam and Christianity, and really is just one of those people that is kind of hitting you with like a lot of facts and logic. But I love kind of seeing this under the hood narrative from Nabeel saying, actually, it was him coming alongside me as a friend that had as much power as any argument.
I mean, that's funny because I had noticed that too, which is like, obviously relationship is everything, and you can't just want to do hit and run evangelism, but it's interesting to think that his perspective was, no, he did love me, when here's a guy who's pretty straightforward, I guess. That's interesting.
You were driven to a point of really just a decision between Islam and Christianity. Tell us about how that happened and what happened.
For a Muslim raised in the West, devout Muslims, a lot of it has to do with apologetics and with truth. What is the truth? Islam very clearly denies some things about Jesus. Yes, Jesus is miracle working, he's the Messiah, but it denies that he ever died on the cross. It denies that he ever claimed to be God. And if he never died on the cross, how did he rise from the dead? So Islam denies the death, deity, and resurrection of Jesus. Well, according to Paul, what do you need to believe in order to be saved? If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, so the deity, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. The very three things Islam denies, you have to believe in order to be saved. And so for me, it was a matter of trying to prove that those things didn't happen in order to establish the case for Islam. Well, as I was trying to disprove those things, I realized the evidence for Jesus' death, deity, and resurrection was very strong.
So that must have been difficult for you again in your devout faith at the time, and all of a sudden some restlessness began?
It wasn't overnight. It took years for me to see this evidence and for it to compile and for the tectonic shifts to happen in my mind. And when I realized the evidence was strong, then I turned my eyes to Islam and I said, how strong is the evidence for Islam? And to my shock, it was far weaker. When I leveled the same criticisms I had leveled on Christianity on Islam, the foundation fell apart. And so that's when it became a matter between me and God of actually asking him to show me the truth.
So how did you actually come to Christ? Dreams were a fundamental part of what God used, and that's even, as Muslims grew up, they take dreams very seriously. Tell our viewers about that. That's fascinating, exciting.
Well, for Muslims, most Muslims don't believe they can commune with God. Some modern Muslims do, and some Sufi Muslims do, but generally in history and the way that Islam has traditionally been taught, is God is kind of removed from you. And the only way you can really get guidance directly from him is through dreams. And Muslims have a prayer, it's called Salat Istikhara, where they specifically ask God to give them dreams for guidance. And so I ask God for visions and for dreams, and I'm not alone in that. Approximately 50 to 70% of former Muslims who are now Christians came partially through visions and dreams.
Wow, that's awesome. And you had one very specific dream. Tell us that.
This dream was the one that convinced me. I had one that was very symbolic, and then I had a follow-up dream, and I also had a vision, but this dream was powerful. In this dream, I was standing at the threshold of a narrow door. This door was just wide enough to fit me, and just tall enough to fit me. I mean, in my dream, it was like, wow, this door is narrow. And at the other side of this doorway was a room that was set with a feast. And people were sitting down in nice clothes at these round tables, and it was like a wedding feast. And I knew in my dream that that room was heaven. I wanted to get into that room, but I couldn't, because at the other end of the doorway was my friend David. Now, he wasn't blocking me per se, he was looking forward. In fact, all the people in the room were looking forward, waiting for the owner or the speaker to come and start the event. But I couldn't get in because he was blocking the way, and so I looked at him and I said, David, I thought we were going to eat together. And he says, you haven't responded. And in the dream, right there, I knew I needed to respond to the invitation David was giving me in order to come into heaven. But this is where it got crazy. When I woke up, I told my friend David the dream. And he said, Nabeel, this dream is so clear. Just go to Luke chapter 13. And I went to Luke 13 for the first time. I had never been to Luke 13 before. Mm-hmm. And when I opened it up, there was a section there that was titled, The Narrow Door. And when I saw it, my heart just stopped.
I bet it did, yeah.
And I'm going to paraphrase it. Basically what it says is Jesus was going through the towns and villages preaching the good news. And the disciples said, Lord, are many going to be saved? And he said, make every effort to enter through that narrow door, because many will try and few will be able. And you will see people sitting inside at the feast of the kingdom of heaven. Make every effort to enter before the owner comes and closes that door. And so I knew that God had given me a dream straight out of the Bible, and he placed me inside a parable, showed me exactly where I was, and he left my decision up to me. Wow. It was very clear for me at that point what I needed to do.
So then what did happen from that point? Because again, your story is amazing in the sense that it wasn't just necessarily that day, but it took a while for you to actually give your life to Christ.
You know, Robbie, in order for a Muslim to become a Christian, they have to be willing to give up a lot. Depending on how devout their family is, their identity is usually wound up in Islam. So it wasn't just me saying, I'm going to change my beliefs.
That's right.
It's me saying, I'm going to leave my family and everything they've stood for, all the way back to Muhammad's time. I mean, my last name's Qureshi. If Muhammad had a last name, it would have been Qureshi. He was part of the Quraysh tribe. And so I had to give up everything. My mother was the daughter of a Muslim missionary, so I had to give up all that. I'm the eldest son in my family. I'm the one who's supposed to bring honor to the family. If I become Christian, that's the worst thing I could possibly do. And so I have to think, not only am I giving up my family, I'm consigning my family's reputation to the flames, basically. And so it was something that I needed a lot of time to wrestle through and to pray through. And I asked God to comfort me through it. And it was when I read his word that I received the promises of God, Mark 10:29.
Yes.
And also the encouragement from God to go ahead and make.
And you went through a whole time of mourning in this too. And I remember you came to Matthew chapter 5 and the Beatitudes, and blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted.
It's beautiful.
And so that was one of the turning points as well,
I
wasn't
can't
it?
tell you how beautiful that message was. You know, in the Quran, there's nothing that says I'm giving you comfort if you're hurting. The Quran says, do this, do that, do this, do that. But there in the Bible, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted.
Wow.
It was like my heart was just electrified into life when I read that, and my life has never been the same. I mean, this message changes everything. If God came into this world to take our sins, that means he loves us. It loves us even though we sin against him. And then he takes a look at us. While he's on the cross, bleeding and dying for us, the words we should remember are, as I have loved you, so love one another. That's the call we're given as Christians. He's given us everything we need in this life and this afterlife. So all we have to do is follow him and pour ourselves out for the sake of those around us.
Grace makes Christianity incredibly unique. God is near. You can talk to him. He does care for your cares. Everything the New Testament offers, I think, is what our heart is longing for. And I think that's what I see here.
I think as well that when he talks about applying the same level of scrutiny to Islam as he did to Christianity and finding that it falls apart fairly quickly, I think that the humility and the willingness to do that is so key for anybody who's a legitimate seeker of the truth, wherever it might lead. Because a lot of times, you know, in even conversations I have via email or in the comment section of this channel or in the real world or whatever, you'll often find a lack of symmetry, if you will, in terms of where people apply their skepticism. It's like extreme skepticism towards the Bible, but then maybe there's like the far less attributed to esoteric hidden gospel of Thomas that seems to be really interesting, and it's, you know, and it's different message about Christ consciousness and or something like that that kind of tickles the ears, and all of a sudden, like all of the scrutiny and the sort of precision that you might analyze like the four gospels in the canon with, that kind of goes out the window, and you're like, this is really interesting. And I feel like I've seen so many different versions of that lack of consistency or symmetry when it comes to how something is looked at. So I just want to say, like, obviously respect for Nabeel for actually being willing to turn that on Islam and analyze everything in an equitable manner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when he was a Muslim and his critique of Christianity was, look, they're not as devout. I think that's actually a very fair critique. When you're I'm committed, you can see it in my lifestyle, my manner, and in every way. And he's saying this just seemed like the easy believism Christianity. I believe this, therefore I'm good. I'll do whatever I want. There is a sense of, yes, salvation is free. And I love that anyone who calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And there's a sense of come to Jesus, and I'm just receiving what he's done for me. However, there's this call to discipleship, and what you hear him say is, I had to count the cost. I had to pray through it. I had to think about my future, hurting my name, my family name, and just the fact that he recognized, Jesus, yes, salvation is free, but Jesus makes it clear discipleship will cost you everything. You must count the cost. And I don't know if if we always portray that, yes, salvation's free, but you got to count the cost of what this means. If I'm all in, and I want Christians to be all in, and he obviously counted the cost, and I do think that's actually an attractive part of the message maybe we shy away from. Yeah. I think it's more attractive than we think, this call to die to self, to pick up your cross daily, to follow Jesus. And I think that even the Christian message is more nuanced than I thought. Yeah.
I even think within the so-called manosphere, where you basically have a rebranding of Greek Stoicism, but articulated by people like Andrew Tate or whatever, where it's basically do hard things, take the narrow road, be die to yourself, essentially. And that is, there are elements of that you can see are extremely enticing to, in particular, men, I think. And I think that the way that Christianity has been presented is totally unappealing to men in maybe the last 50 years, where it's sort of God loves you, there's not really much work for you to do, but just kind of go to church and just receive this thing. And it's I think a lot of people hear that are pieces of the whole, and they think that's kind of feminine, that's kind of boring, and I don't really know exactly what to do in response to that. Yeah. I know I'm kind of presenting there's a lot more, that's a very straw man version of it, but I like, as he was saying that part that you're talking about, I thought that makes sense to me, how the call to take up one's cross would appeal to him as a Muslim, because Islam is a very masculine faith in the sense that it's very difficult, and it has sort of this challenge, this sort of quest, this sort of do these certain things. Now, Christianity is not do certain things to become a Christian, but I like that the actual teachings of Jesus to follow me. Yes, you're with me, we're united, but now let's become my disciple and learn how to live how I live. Mm-hmm. That's not easy. No. And I like that sort of the teeth of Christianity that we, I think, sometimes in evangelism are afraid of, actually became the things that enticed him and brought him close. I'll leave a link in the description where you can watch a documentary that I made. It's got Nabeel Qureshi, Lee Strobel, William Lane Craig, and a bunch of other people in there that answer a lot of the questions that I've had about God over the years. I think you'll really like it, and it's totally free.